Hey everyone, welcome back to Try Not to Sleep. I'm your host, Ethan Brooks, and as always, we're here with another calm, slightly boring story from history to help you unwind. Tonight, we will be talking about the idea of what might have happened if humans inherited Earth after it had once been ruled by the Anunnaki. Those mysterious ancient beings from Mesopotamian legend. All right, get comfortable, and let's see how far you make it before you fall asleep. Ancient Mesopotamia developed between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. People built the first cities here around 4000 BCE. Clay tablets from this region describe powerful beings called the Anunnaki. Sumerian priests recorded stories of these visitors in cuneiform script. They wrote that the Anunnaki came from the heavens and brought new knowledge. In the city of Eridu, temple records mention rituals honoring the Anunnaki. Priests offered food and drink to statues representing these deities. The Sumerians believed the Anunnaki taught them irrigation, writing, and mathematics. Kings claimed their authority came from these gods. Ziggurats, or step pyramids, were built to connect the earth with the sky. Some legends say the Anunnaki descended to these temples. Archaeologists have found cylinder seals showing figures with wings and horned crowns. These images match descriptions of the Anunnaki in ancient texts. Some seals show humans standing beside larger figures. In myths, these figures gave humans laws and instructed them in agriculture. The Code of Ur-Nammu, one of the oldest legal codes, was said to be inspired by the Anunnaki. In Babylon, the Epic of Gilgamesh mentions gods who shaped the fate of kings. The story describes Enki, a wise Anunnaki, teaching people how to survive floods. Other tales say the Anunnaki created humans to work the land. Priests traced their own family lines to these divine beings. Stone ruins in places like Nippur and Ur advanced building skills. Some researchers suggest these skills came from lost knowledge. Massive blocks and precise layouts hint at techniques that later generations could not explain. Stories spread of hidden chambers and lost cities once ruled by the Anunnaki. Over centuries, the legends of these strange visitors blended into the beliefs of later culture. Their names and stories appeared in Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian records. The idea of powerful beings shaping early civilization became a lasting part of Mesopotamian history. The earliest stories of the Anunnaki describe meetings with the first people of Sumer. Sumerian tablets from around 3000 BCE mention these encounters. According to the texts, the Anunnaki arrived during a time when humans lived in small villages and farmed the land. Priests wrote that the Anunnaki appeared at riverbanks and fields, observing the daily lives of the people. In some accounts, the Anunnaki selected certain humans for instruction. Sumerian legend names Adapa as one of the first to receive their teachings. The texts say he learned writing, numbers, and the secrets of bread making from Enki, a leading Anunnaki figure. Adapa later became a priest and scribe, passing this knowledge to others in Eridu. The Anunnaki were described as taller than humans, with elaborate clothing and jewelry. Witnesses reported seeing them in groups, walking through city gates, or standing near temple altars. Some stories mention the Anunnaki using tools made of gold and lapis lazuli. These tools were said to perform tasks that seemed impossible to early humans. Sumerian records tell of gatherings where the Anunnaki gave instructions to city leaders. They explained how to organize irrigation canals and store grain for winter. The first city walls in Uruk and Lagash were built under their direction, according to temple inscriptions. The Anunnaki also taught people how to make bricks and fire pottery. In return, the Anunnaki asked for offerings of food, drink, and incense. Priests performed daily rituals to honor their visitors. These ceremonies were recorded in detail on clay tablets. The Anunnaki set rules for justice, trade, and marriage. These rules formed the basis of the first city laws. Over time, the first encounters between humans and the Anunnaki became central to Mesopotamian tradition. Each new generation retold these events, adding details and names. The stories shaped how people understood their origins and the order of their society. In the cities of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon, rulers often claimed descent from the Anunnaki. Kings listed their ancestry on stone tablets and cylinder seals. They named Anunnaki gods like Enlil, Enki, and Inanna as ancestors or protectors. This tradition began with the Sumerian king list, a record carved in cuneiform. The list described early kings who ruled for thousands of years, saying their authority came directly from the god. Priests crowned new kings in ceremonies held at ziggurat. During these rituals, the king received symbols of power, such as a scepter and a ring. These items represented gifts from the Anunnaki. The king then swore oaths to uphold the laws and customs established by the gods. Royal inscriptions often describe victories in battle or successful building projects as achievements blessed by the Anunnaki. In the city of Ur, King Shulgi claimed that Nana, the moon god, and an Anunnaki was his father. He built temples and offered sacrifices to maintain this connection. In Akkad, Sargon the Great said that the goddess Ishtar watched over his reign. He dedicated statues and treasures to her in the main temple. These actions reinforced the belief that the king's power was not just political but divine. The laws of Hammurabi, written in Babylon around 1754 BCE, began with a statement that the god Marduk, an Anunnaki, chose Hammurabi to bring justice. The code listed rules for trade, property, and punishment. It was displayed on tall stone steels in public places. People believed that following these laws kept the favor of the Anunnaki. Over centuries, the idea of divine rulers spread beyond Mesopotamia. Neighboring regions adopted similar stories and rituals. The belief in rulers connected to powerful gods shaped the politics and religion of the ancient Near East for generations. As the belief in Anunnaki-guided rulers spread, neighboring societies began to adopt similar systems of governance and law. In Elam, to the east of Sumer, kings built temples and claimed guidance from gods with traits like the Anunnaki. In the west, the Hittites of Anatolia recorded treaties and laws that invoked the authority of their own pantheon, reflecting the influence of Mesopotamian traditions. City-states established councils of elders and priests to interpret divine will. Written codes became more common. In Mari, on the Euphrates, scribes documented legal decisions and land agreements, citing the favor of the gods. These records were stored in palace archives for reference and enforcement. Trade between regions increased as order and laws allowed merchants to travel safely. Caravans carried goods like tin, copper, wool, and grain between cities. Written contracts and official seals protected both buyers and sellers. The use of standardized weights and measures, first introduced in Sumer, spread throughout the Near East. Priests played a central role in maintaining order. They organized festivals, recorded omens, and managed temple land. Temples became centers of administration and learning. Young scribes learned cuneiform and mathematics in temple schools. Many of these skills were attributed to the teachings of the Anunnaki in early myths. Rulers built walls and fortifications to protect their city. They organized labor for irrigation projects, using knowledge said to come from the gods. This allowed for larger harvests and population growth. Cities like Babylon and Nineveh expanded rapidly during this period. Religious rituals reinforced the social order. Annual festivals celebrated the renewal of kingship and the favor of the gods. People believed that following the rules set by the divine visitors would ensure peace and prosperity. Over time, these practices created a stable framework for life in the ancient Near East. As city populations grew, leaders saw the need for new laws to address changing conditions. Scribes recorded disputes over land, water, and trade. In the city of Lagash, around 2400 BCE, King Urukagina issued reforms to protect the poor from unfair taxes and corruption. His decrees limited the power of officials and priests, and he ordered that widows and orphans receive special protection. These reforms were written on clay tablets and displayed in public places. In Babylon, King Hammurabi created a comprehensive code of laws around 1754 BCE BY. He ordered his scribes to carve these laws onto a tall stone stele. The stele was placed in a temple for all to see. The code included rules for contracts, wages, property, and family matters. Hammurabi claimed that the laws were given to him by Shamash, the sun god, and a member of the Anunnaki pantheon. The opening lines of the code described how Hammurabi was chosen by the gods to bring justice to the land. Other cities followed this example. In Eshnunna, rulers issued their own legal codes, covering topics such as theft, marriage, and loans. These laws were often similar to those in Babylon, but adapted to local customs. Tribes used cuneiform script to ensure that the laws could be read and enforced by officials. Temples played a role in the administration of justice. Priests sometimes acted as judges in disputes involving religious matters or temple property. In more serious cases, kings or appointed officials presided over trials. Punishments varied, ranging from fines and restitution to exile or physical penalties. The process of creating and enforcing laws became part of daily life. Citizens learned the rules from public readings and temple schools. Over time, the tradition of written law helped maintain order and fairness in growing cities. This system, inspired by the ancient belief in divine guidance, influenced later civilizations throughout the region. The influence of the Anunnaki legends extended beyond law and government. Early societies in Mesopotamia organized daily life around temple complexes. Temples served as centers for religious activity, economic management, and education. Priests directed the storage and distribution of grain, managed livestock, and oversaw craft workshops. These activities supported both the temple and the wider community. Families followed customs and rituals described in temple records. Marriage contracts, inheritance rules, and property transfers were documented on clay tablets. These documents were stored in temple archives, ensuring that agreements could be referenced and disputes settled. Children learned reading, writing, and arithmetic from scribes who worked for the temple. The skills taught were believed to have originated from the teachings of the Anunnaki. Festivals marked the agricultural calendar. People gathered to honor the gods with offerings and processions. The Akitu festival in Babylon celebrated the new year and reaffirmed the king's connection to the divine. During these events, statues of the gods were carried through the streets and hymns were recited. These public ceremonies reinforced social bonds and reminded citizens of their shared beliefs. Trade and communication between cities increased as societies grew. Merchants used standardized weights and measures, and official seals authenticated goods and documents. Caravans traveled between Sumer, Akkad, Elam, and regions beyond. The exchange of goods also spread ideas, stories, and technologies linked to the Anunnaki. Building projects shaped the urban landscape. Workers constructed city walls, canals, and ziggurats using methods passed down through generations. Some believed that the knowledge to move heavy stones and plan large structures came from the gods. The layout of cities often reflected religious principles, with temples at the center, streets radiating outward. Through these practices, early societies established patterns of life that lasted for centuries. The legacy of the Anunnaki legends continued to shape values, customs, and institutions across Mesopotamia and neighboring lands. According to Sumerian records, the Anunnaki played a direct role in teaching agriculture. Early tablets from the city of Nippur describe how the gods explained the timing of planting and harvesting. Priests organized the construction of irrigation canals, following instructions said to come from Enki, an important Anunnaki deity. These canals brought water from the rivers to the fields, allowing farmers to grow barley, wheat, and dates, even during dry months. Farmers learned to use simple plows and seed drills. The tools were made from wood and metal, and their designs improved over time. Temple officials kept records of crop yields and distributed seed grain each season. Surplus harvests were stored in large granaries attached to temple complexes. These granaries protected food supplies during floods or droughts. The development of writing was closely linked to agricultural management. The earliest writing, called cuneiform, appeared around 3200 BCE in Uruk. Scribes used reeds to press wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets. At first, they recorded lists of goods, such as grain, livestock, and textiles. These records helped priests track offerings to the gods and manage temple resources. Over time, cuneiform writing expanded to include contracts, laws, and letters. Scribes received training in special schools run by temple officials. Students practiced by copying lists and proverbs. Mastery of writing was highly respected, and scribes often held important positions in society. The spread of agricultural knowledge and writing allowed cities to grow larger and more complex. Farmers could support larger populations, and officials could organize labor for building projects. Written records made it possible to collect taxes, resolve disputes, and preserve history. The skills of agriculture and writing, linked to the teachings of the Anunnaki in legend, became the foundation of Mesopotamian civilization. Stories from ancient Mesopotamia describe the Anunnaki as bearers of advanced technology. Sumerian and Akkadian tablets mention tools and devices that seemed unusual for their time. In some myths, the Anunnaki introduced metalworking to early craftsmen. They taught people how to extract copper and tin from ore and combine them to make bronze. This knowledge allowed smiths to create stronger weapons, durable farming tools, and decorative objects. Temple workshops became centers for innovation. Craftsmen learned to cast metal in clay molds, producing axes, chisels, and jewelry. Pottery kilns grew larger and more efficient. Glazing techniques improved, resulting in brightly colored vessels. Some legends credit the Anunnaki with showing people how to fire bricks at high temperatures, making buildings more resistant to floods and weather. Construction methods also advanced. Ziggurats and city walls were built using precise measurements and alignment. Surveyors used ropes, plumb bobs, and leveling instruments to lay out straight streets and right angles. Written instructions for mixing mortar and stacking bricks have been found on clay tablets. These records suggest a systematic approach to building, guided by practical knowledge. Astronomy and mathematics developed alongside other technologies. Priests tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and planets from temple rooftops. They used clay tablets to record eclipses and predict seasonal changes. The sexagesimal number system, based on the number 60, was used to measure time and angles. This system still influences how hours and minutes are divided today. Water management was another area of progress. The Anunnaki legends describe the digging of canals and the construction of reservoirs. Engineers designed sluice gates and drainage systems to control flooding. These efforts allowed cities to thrive even in years of low rainfall. Through these advancements, Mesopotamian society became more organized and prosperous. The tradition of sharing technology, linked in legend to the Anunnaki, helped shape the daily life and growth of early civilization. The first cities in Mesopotamia appeared along the lower Tigris and Euphrates rivers around 4000 BCEY. Archaeologists have identified Uruk as one of the earliest and largest of these cities. At its peak, Uruk covered over 250 hectares and housed tens of thousands of people. Thick mud brick walls surrounded the city, providing protection from raids and floods. City planners organized Uruk into districts for housing, markets, temples, and workshops. Streets followed straight lines, and canals brought water to neighborhoods and fields. The Anna temple complex stood at the center, dedicated to the goddess Inanna. Workers built the temple using thousands of sun-dried bricks and decorated it with colored clay cones pressed into the walls. Other cities soon followed. Eridu, Lagash, and Nippur each developed their own layouts and centers of worship. Ziggurats rose above the flat landscape, serving as both religious and administrative hubs. These step towers were built in layers, with ramps and staircases leading to shrines at the top. While priests managed the temples and directed large workforces for construction and maintenance. City dwellers lived in houses made from mud brick. Homes were grouped along narrow lanes and courtyards. Most families kept small gardens and livestock within city walls. Markets sold grain, fish, pottery, and textiles. Craftsmen worked in specialized quarters, producing tools, jewelry, and weapons. Trade connected the cities with distant regions. Merchants traveled by riverboat and donkey caravan, exchanging goods with Elam, Anatolia, and the Persian Gulf. Written contracts and cylinder seals recorded transactions and guaranteed fair exchanges. City governments collected taxes in the form of grain or labor. Officials oversaw the repair of canals, the defense of the city, and the enforcement of law. Scribes kept records of births, deaths, property, and legal cases. Through careful planning and cooperation, the first cities of Mesopotamia became centers of culture trade, and innovation. Their organization and achievements laid the groundwork for later civilizations in the ancient world. The people of ancient Mesopotamia began constructing monumental structures soon after the rise of the first cities. The most distinctive of these were ziggurats, large, stepped towers built from mud brick. The earliest known ziggurat stood in the city of Eridu around 4000 BCE. Over time, cities such as Ur, Uruk, and Nippur built even larger towers. The ziggurat of Ur, constructed during the reign of King Ur-Nammu around 2100 BCE, measured over 30 meters high and included several terraces. Building a ziggurat required thousands of workers. Laborers shaped mud bricks by hand and dried them in the sun. Craftsmen laid the bricks in thick layers, using bitumen as mortar to strengthen the structure. Ramps and scaffolding allowed workers to reach higher levels as construction progressed. The core of each ziggurat was solid, with small rooms or shrines at the top for religious ceremonies. Temples and palaces also dominated the city skylines. The White Temple in Uruk, built around 3500 BCE, stood on a raised platform and featured thick walls, columns, and decorative niches. Palaces in cities like Mare and Babylon included large courtyards, audience halls, and storage rooms. Walls were often decorated with carved stone reliefs and painted tiles. City walls and gates were another form of monumental construction. The city of Babylon was famous for its double walls and the Ishtar Gate, built by King Nebuchadnezzar II around 575 BCE. The gate was covered in blue-glazed bricks and decorated with images of bulls and dragons. Canals, reservoirs, and bridges supported the growth of cities. Workers dug channels to bring water from the rivers, and engineers built embankments to prevent flooding. These projects required careful planning and coordination. The construction of monumental structures demonstrated the organization, skill, and resources of early Mesopotamian society. These buildings served religious, administrative, and defensive purposes, and many remain visible as ruins today. Over time, many Mesopotamian cities were abandoned due to shifting rivers, changing trade routes, and invasions. The ruins of these cities remained buried under layers of earth and sand for centuries. Archaeologists began systematic excavations in the 19th century. They uncovered the remains of ziggurats, temples, palaces, and city walls in places like Ur, Uruk, and Babylon. Excavators found massive foundations and brickwork that showed advanced construction techniques. Some bricks bore stamped inscriptions with the names of kings and the purpose of the buildings. In the ruins of Ur, the great ziggurat still rises above the flat plain, its lower levels largely intact. At Babylon, the outlines of the Ishtar Gate and the city's processional way remain visible. Among the ruins, archaeologists discovered artifacts that raised questions about ancient technology. Stone vases, copper tools, and intricate jewelry were found in royal tombs. In some sites, large stone blocks were fitted together with remarkable precision. The methods used to move and place these stones are not fully understood. Cylinder seals and carved reliefs depict scenes of construction, rituals, and processions, offering clues about daily life and belief. Some structures appear to have served astronomical purposes. At the city of Sippar, a temple dedicated to the sun god, Shamash contained records of solar observation. Clay tablets found in temple archives include lists of eclipses, star positions, and planetary movements. These records suggest a detailed knowledge of astronomy. Legends from later periods claimed that some ruins were built by giants or divine beings. Stories about the Anunnaki became linked to the largest and most mysterious structures. Local people sometimes avoided these sites, believing they were cursed or protected by spirits. Today, researchers continue to study the ruins using modern technology. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and chemical analysis reveal new details each year. The ruins of Mesopotamia remain a source of discovery and debate, preserving the mysteries of an ancient world shaped by both human effort and enduring legends. Researchers have searched for physical evidence of the Anunnaki in Mesopotamian ruins for more than a century. Archaeologists focus on temple sites, ziggurats, and ancient city centers where myths say the Anunnaki once appeared. Excavations at Eridu, and Nippur have uncovered thousands of clay tablets. These tablets contain hymns, prayers, and lists of offerings dedicated to the Anunnaki. They describe rituals and festivals, but do not show direct evidence of non-human visitors. Statues and reliefs from Sumerian and Akkadian periods often depict figures with elaborate headdresses and wings. Some scholars identify these as representations of gods or priests. The winged figures appear on cylinder seals, boundary stones, and temple walls. Their style and symbolism match descriptions in ancient texts, but there is no clear proof they represent beings from another world. Researchers have also examined unusual artifacts for signs of advanced technology. Copper chisels, bronze tools, and stone vessels show high levels of craftsmanship. However, testing reveals they were made with techniques known in the ancient Near East. No artifacts have been found that cannot be explained by the skills of local craftsmen. Large stone blocks and precise brickwork in ziggurats and temples have attracted attention. Engineers have studied the construction methods, including the use of ramps, levers, and manpower. Written records describe how kings organized labor forces and collected materials from distant regions. The building projects required planning and coordination, but no evidence suggests the use of unknown technology. Genetic studies of ancient human remains from Mesopotamia show links to surrounding populations. Scientists have not identified any markers that would suggest hybrid ancestry with non-human beings. The population appears to have developed through migration, trade, and intermarriage with neighboring groups. Despite many investigations, no physical traces of the Anunnaki have been found. The stories remain important for understanding the beliefs and culture of ancient Mesopotamia. Researchers continue to study new sites and artifacts, hoping to learn more about the origins of these enduring legends. In ancient Mesopotamia, Anunnaki myths shaped many aspects of daily life. People began each day with prayers or offerings to household gods, some of whom were associated with the Anunnaki. Small clay figurines and altars were placed in homes as a sign of respect and for protection. Families recited hymns or repeated blessings learned from temple priests. Farmers followed agricultural calendars linked to Anunnaki legends. Stories about Enlil and Enki explained the reasons for floods and droughts. When the rivers rose, people believed the Anunnaki were sending water for crops. During dry years, priests led rituals to ask for the gods' favor. These ceremonies took place in fields or at city temples and included music, chanting, and food offering. Children heard Anunnaki stories from an early age. Parents and elders told tales about the creation of humans, the building of the first cities, and the deeds of legendary kings. These stories were repeated during festivals and family gatherings. Scribes copied myths onto clay tablets for use in temple schools. Students learned to read and write by practicing with these texts. Craftsmen decorated pottery, jewelry, and cylinder seals with images from Anunnaki myths. Common motifs included winged gods, divine animals, and scenes of rituals. People wore amulets inscribed with protective prayers. Merchants carried seals showing Anunnaki symbols to mark their goods and guarantee fair trade. The legal system also reflected Anunnaki influence. Laws were often introduced with statements crediting the gods for their wisdom. Judges and officials swore oaths in the names of the Anunnaki before hearing cases or making decisions. Temple records show that disputes over land, marriage, and business were settled according to rules believed to come from the god. Seasonal festivals honored the Anunnaki with processions, feasts, and dramatic reenactments of mythological events. These public celebrations reinforced community bonds and reminded everyone of their place in a world shaped by divine stories. Through these daily practices, Anunnaki myths remained central to Mesopotamian life for centuries. Temples stood at the heart of every major Mesopotamian city. Each temple was dedicated to a specific god or goddess from the Anunnaki pantheon. The largest temples, such as the Ana complex in Uruk and the Temple of Enlil in Nippur, served as both religious and administrative centers. Priests and priestesses managed temple activities, supervised rituals, and maintained temple property. Daily rituals began before sunrise. Temple staff washed statues of the gods, dressed them in fine garments, and placed offerings of bread, fruit, and beer before them. Incense was burned to purify the air and please the deities. Musicians played lyres and drums, while singers recited hymns in Sumerian or Akkadian. These acts were recorded in temple archives by scribes. Special ceremonies marked important points in the agricultural calendar. During planting and harvest festivals, crowds gathered in temple courtyard. Priests led processions carrying statues of the gods through city streets. Participants sang, danced, and presented gifts such as grain, livestock, and textiles. These offerings were stored in temple granaries and redistributed as needed. Temples also played a role in divination. Priests interpreted omens from the movement of stars, the shape of animal livers, or the patterns of oil in water. Kings and officials consulted temple experts before making decisions about war, trade, or building projects. Written records of these consultations have been found on clay tablets. The temple complex included workshops, kitchens, and storerooms. Artisans produced ceremonial vessels, jewelry, and ritual objects for use in daily and seasonal rites. Temple lands were farmed by workers who paid a share of their crops as rent. The temple staff managed these resources and organized labor for construction and repair. Through these rituals and the daily operation of temples, the Anunnaki remained present in the lives of the people. The structure and discipline of temple life helped maintain order and reinforced the importance of the divine in Mesopotamian society. Symbols associated with the Anunnaki became part of daily life and were passed down through generations. The most common was the horned crown, shown on statues and cylinder seals to mark a figure as divine. Winged discs and rosettes appeared on temple walls, jewelry, and official documents. These symbols identified places and objects as under the protection of the gods. Cylinder seals were widely used by officials, merchants, and priests. Each seal bore a unique design, often featuring Anunnaki figures, animals, and sacred trees. People rolled these seals over wet clay to sign contracts or mark property. The images on the seals served as both identification and a reminder of divine authority. Tablets inscribed with cuneiform writing recorded prayers, laws, and myths. Many included invocations to the Anunnaki, asking for protection or success. These texts were copied and recopied in temple schools across centuries. Scribes learned to draw the symbols for gods, stars, and sacred animals as part of their training. The writing system itself became a symbol of civilization and order. Jewelry and amulets carried Anunnaki motifs. Craftsmen shaped gold, silver, and lapis lazuli into pendants showing the horned crown or winged figures. Families believed these items brought good fortune and safety. Some amulets were buried with the dead to ensure favor in the afterlife. Architectural features also preserved Anunnaki symbols. Ziggurats were built with stepped levels, thought to represent the connection between earth and the heavens. Gates and doorways often displayed carved images of protective spirits or gods. These carvings mark the entrance as sacred and guarded. Over time, these symbols spread beyond Mesopotamia. Neighboring cultures adopted similar motifs in their own art and writing. The continued use of Anunnaki symbols helped preserve the stories and beliefs of ancient Mesopotamia, linking each new generation to the traditions of the past. As Mesopotamian cities grew, they interacted more often with neighboring regions. Trade routes connected Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon with Elam, Anatolia, and the Levant. Merchants exchanged grain, wool, metals, and luxury goods. Written contracts and shared symbols made business easier across language barriers. Temple officials sometimes arranged large shipments of tin and copper for bronze production. The spread of cuneiform writing allowed scribes in distant cities to communicate using a common script. Shared religious practices also encouraged cooperation. Rulers sent gifts to foreign temples and invited priests from other cities to major festivals. Some kings married princesses from neighboring lands to form alliances. So, these marriages were recorded on clay tablets and celebrated with public ceremonies. Diplomats traveled between courts, carrying messages sealed with the symbols of their gods. Despite these connections, conflicts often arose over land, water, and trade rights. City-states built defensive walls and maintained standing armies. Commanders led campaigns to secure farmland or control river crossing. Battles were recorded in royal inscriptions, which credited victory to the favor of the Anunnaki. Kings claimed that their right to rule and expand came from divine authority. Treaties and peace agreements were sometimes made in the names of the gods. These documents listed the terms of peace and the penalties for breaking them. Parties swore oaths before statues of the Anunnaki, and copies of the agreements were kept in temple archives. When disputes flared again, envoys would present these documents as evidence. Periods of conflict often led to changes in leadership. Victorious rulers took control of rival cities and installed loyal officials. They rebuilt temples and dedicated new statues to the Anunnaki, seeking to legitimize their rule. Conquered peoples sometimes adopted the symbols and stories of their new leaders, blending traditions over time. Through cooperation and conflict, the legacy of Mesopotamian beliefs and Anunnaki symbols continued to shape the political and cultural landscape of the ancient Near East. Ancient Mesopotamian myths sometimes included tales of unions between gods and humans. These stories often described the birth of unusual children with special abilities. In Sumerian and Akkadian texts, certain kings and heroes were said to have divine ancestry. The Sumerian king list recorded rulers with lifespans far longer than ordinary people, suggesting a connection to the gods. One example appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, was described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. His mother, Ninsun, was a goddess, while his father was a mortal king. The epic credited Gilgamesh with great strength, wisdom, and courage beyond that of other men. He became a model for later rulers who claimed descent from the gods. In other legends, priests and priestesses served as intermediaries between humans and the Anunnaki. Some stories claimed that children born from these unions possessed unique talents or knowledge. These individuals sometimes became advisors, scribes, or leaders in their community. Temple records mention special training for such children, preparing them for roles in religious or administrative life. Genealogies inscribed on clay tablets listed ancestors who were believed to be part divine. These lineages were important for establishing the legitimacy of kings and high officials. Rulers often traced their ancestry back to a god or goddess to strengthen their claim to power. Artifacts and art from the period sometimes depicted figures with both human and divine features. Statues and reliefs showed individuals wearing horned crowns or standing beside gods. These images reinforce the idea of a connection between the ruling class and the Anunnaki. No physical evidence of hybrid offspring has been found by archaeologists. The stories remain part of the cultural tradition, shaping how people viewed their leaders and the origins of their society. Over time, the legends of hybrid descendants blended with local beliefs and continued to influence the history of the region. Throughout Mesopotamian history, rulers often claimed descent from the gods to strengthen their authority. Kings of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria listed divine ancestors in their official inscription. These genealogies appeared on clay tablets, stone steels, and temple walls. Rulers, such as Sargon of Akkad, who reigned around 2300 BCE, referred to themselves as chosen by Ishtar or protected by Enlil. In Ur, King Shulgi declared himself the son of Nana, the moon god, and participated in rituals that reinforced his divine status. Royal families arranged marriages to connect their bloodlines with priestly or noble clans. These unions were recorded in temple archives and celebrated with public ceremonies. Some families traced their ancestry through both maternal and paternal lines, linking themselves to multiple deities. This practice helped legitimize their rule and maintain stability during succession dispute. Priests played a key role in preserving and promoting these bloodline legends. They maintained records of births, marriages, and deaths within royal households. During coronation ceremonies, priests recited hymns and prayers that named the king's divine ancestors. They presented the new ruler with regalia, such as crowns and scepters, said to be gifts from the gods. In literature, epic tales reinforce the idea of divine bloodlines. The Epic of Gilgamesh described its hero as part god, part human. Later, stories about kings and heroes repeated similar theme. These tales were copied and adapted by scribes for generation. Symbols of divine ancestry appeared in art and architecture. Reliefs showed kings standing beside gods or receiving blessings. Royal seals combined images of rulers and deities. Palaces and temples displayed inscriptions that linked the king's achievements to his divine heritage. Over time, the belief in divine bloodlines spread beyond Mesopotamia. Neighboring regions adopted similar practices, blending local traditions with Mesopotamian model. The legends of rulers descended from gods remained central to the identity and authority of ancient Near Eastern society. Ancient records from Mesopotamia and nearby regions show a shift in religious and political life around the end of the second millennium BCE. Tablets and inscriptions from this period mention fewer direct appearances of gods among humans. Rituals continued, but stories of the Anunnaki walking in cities or speaking to kings became rare. Priests and scribes began to describe the gods as distant, living in the heavens or on sacred mountains, rather than among the people. Some texts, such as the Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish, refer to a time when the gods withdrew from daily affairs. These stories say the Anunnaki assigned lesser deities or spirits to watch over temples and cities. Kings still claimed divine support, but their authority relied more on tradition and law than on personal encounters with the gods. Archaeological evidence supports these changes. Temples remained important, but their construction slowed in many cities. Ziggurats and shrines were maintained, yet new monumental projects became less frequent. In some regions, old temples were abandoned or repurposed for other uses. The number of inscriptions describing direct communication with the gods decreased sharply. Political changes also occurred during this period. Dynasties rose and fell more quickly. Foreign powers, such as the Hittites, Kassites, and Assyrians, gained influence over Mesopotamian cities. These new rulers adopted local customs, but often brought their own gods and religious practices. The blending of traditions continued, but the sense of immediate divine presence faded from official record. Legends of the Anunnaki and divine ancestors remained part of literature and ritual. Scribes copied older myths and preserved them in temple libraries. People still offered prayers and sacrifices, hoping for protection and favor. However, the belief in gods living among humans gave way to a new era, where the divine world seemed more remote and mysterious. This change marked the end of an age shaped by the stories and presence of the Anunnaki. After the Anunnaki were no longer seen among humans, new myths arose to explain their absence. Scribes and priests recorded these stories on clay tablets in Akkadian and later in Aramaic. One common explanation described the Anunnaki as returning to their home in the heavens. Texts from Babylon and Assyria mention the gods gathering in council, deciding to leave earthly matters to humans and lesser spirits. Some myths said the Anunnaki withdrew because of human disobedience or neglect of rituals. In these accounts, the gods became displeased with the way people honored them. Temple records from the city of Nippur describe periods when offerings decreased or festivals were not performed correctly. Priests wrote that the gods responded by withdrawing their presence and favor. Other stories focused on cosmic cycles. In some versions, the Anunnaki were said to rule for a fixed period before stepping aside. The Sumerian king list refers to reigns measured in thousands of years, followed by a transfer of power from gods to humans. This idea appears in later texts, where the gods hand over the me or divine decrees to kings and priests. There are also myths involving great floods or disasters. The Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic both describe events where the gods sent floods to cleanse the earth. After these disasters, the Anunnaki retreated, leaving humans to rebuild civilization. These stories explain the loss of direct contact as a result of divine judgment and renewal. In temple rituals, priests sometimes invoked the absent gods, asking them to return or send signs of their favor. Hymns and prayers from the first millennium BCE often include requests for forgiveness and guidance. These texts show that people remembered the Anunnaki and hoped for their continued protection, even as their presence became only a memory in legend and ritual. After the Anunnaki were no longer seen as active in daily life, humans assumed full responsibility for their cities and lands. Kings and officials continued to govern using laws and traditions established in earlier centuries. Scribes copied and preserved legal codes, such as the Code of Hammurabi and the Laws of Eshnunna. These texts guided courts and administrators in resolving disputes, collecting taxes, and managing resources. Temple priests maintained rituals and festivals, but they now relied on inherited procedures rather than direct instructions from the gods. Offerings, hymns, and processions continued according to established calendars. Priests trained new generations using written records and oral teachings. Temple schools taught reading, writing, mathematics, and religious knowledge to young scribes. Artisans and builders used skills and techniques passed down through families and guilds. They constructed new homes, repaired city walls, and maintained irrigation canals. Craftsmen produced pottery, tools, and jewelry using methods developed over centuries. Agricultural workers planted and harvested crops according to seasonal cycles, relying on experience and observation. Trade networks expanded as merchants traveled farther in search of goods and markets. Caravans carried grain, textiles, metals, and luxury items between Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, and the Persian Gulf. Written contracts and official seals ensured fair exchanges and protected property rights. Marketplaces in cities like Babylon and Nineveh became centers of commerce and communication. Scholars and astronomers continued to study the stars, record eclipses, and calculate calendars. They wrote treatises on medicine, mathematics, and divination. Libraries in temples and palaces stored thousands of clay tablets, preserving knowledge for future generations. Over time, new empires rose and fell across the region. Each adopted and adapted the traditions left by earlier society. The stories of the Anunnaki remained in myths, rituals, and symbols, but humans now shaped their own destinies. The achievements of Mesopotamian civilization continued to influence later cultures in the ancient world. The concept of kingship in Mesopotamia was closely tied to Anunnaki tradition. Early Sumerian rulers claimed their authority came directly from the gods. Inscriptions on clay tablets and stone steels described how the Anunnaki chose kings and granted them the right to govern. The Sumerian king list, compiled around 2100 BCE, recorded each king's reign, and often stated that kingship was lowered from heaven. During coronation ceremonies, priests invoked the names of Anunnaki deities, such as Enlil, Inanna, and Anu. The new king received royal insignia, including a crown, scepter, and ceremonial robe. These items symbolized the transfer of divine power. Priests recited hymns and performed rituals to confirm the king's connection to the gods. The king swore oaths to uphold the laws and protect the temples. Throughout the Akkadian and Babylonian periods, rulers continued to emphasize their relationship with the Anunnaki. Sargon of Akkad and his descendants described themselves as chosen by Ishtar, an important Anunnaki goddess. Hammurabi, king of Babylon, introduced his code of laws by stating that Shamash, the sun god, appointed him to bring justice. Reliefs and cylinder seals from this era often showed kings receiving blessings from divine figures. Assyrian kings adopted similar practices. Ashurnasirpal II and Sennacherib built grand palaces and decorated them with scenes of the king standing before the gods. In official inscriptions, they credited the Anunnaki with their military victories and successful building projects. Annual festivals and temple rituals reinforced the idea that the king served as the god's representative on earth. Even as new empires rose, the tradition of linking kingship to divine favor continued. Later rulers in Persia and beyond borrowed these symbols and ceremonies. The legacy of the Anunnaki remained central to the institution of kingship, shaping political authority and religious practices for centuries after their stories faded from daily life. References to the Anunnaki and their influence appear in many ancient texts outside Mesopotamia. In the first millennium BCE, scribes in Assyria and Babylonia continued to copy Sumerian and Akkadian myths. The Epic of Gilgamesh, Enuma Elish, and other stories were preserved in royal libraries, including the famous Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. These texts described the deeds of the gods, the origins of humanity, and the foundations of law and kingship. In the Hittite capital of Hattusa, clay tablets written in cuneiform included versions of Mesopotamian myths. Hittite scribes adapted stories of creation, the flood, and divine councils, blending them with local traditions. The Hurrians, who lived in northern Mesopotamia and Anatolia, also recorded myths with gods resembling the Anunnaki. Their texts described divine assemblies, cosmic battles, and the transfer of power from older to younger gods. Egyptian records from the New Kingdom mention contacts with Mesopotamian cities and the exchange of gifts and knowledge. Some Egyptian texts refer to foreign gods and rulers with divine ancestry, reflecting the influence of Mesopotamian beliefs. In the Levant, the Ugaritic texts from Ras Shamra include myths of divine councils and cosmic order similar to those found in Sumer and Akkad. The Hebrew Bible contains echoes of Mesopotamian legends. The story of the flood in Genesis shares details with the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic. The concept of a divine assembly appears in Psalms and other biblical books. Scholars have noted similarities in language, themes, and imagery between these texts and earlier Mesopotamian sources. Greek historians such as Berosus, writing in the Hellenistic period, recorded Babylonian traditions about ancient kings and God. His accounts included references to the Anunnaki and their role in teaching civilization. Through these texts, the legacy of the Anunnaki continued to influence literature, religion, and historical writing across the ancient world. After the stories of the Anunnaki spread beyond Mesopotamia, their influence appeared in the laws and customs of many ancient societies. The earliest legal codes in Sumer and Akkad, such as the Code of Ur-Nammu and the laws of Lipit Ishtar, were attributed to divine inspiration. These codes set standards for justice, property, trade, and family life. They required fairness in contracts, penalties for theft, and restitution for injury. Judges and officials swore oaths by the gods before making decisions. In Babylon, Hammurabi's code became a model for later rulers. The prologue stated that Hammurabi received his authority from Shamash, the sun god. The laws covered topics such as wages, liability, inheritance, and marriage. They were carved on stone steels and displayed in public places. Citizens could read or hear the laws recited during assemblies. This practice encouraged transparency and accountability. Assyrian and Hittite kings issued their own legal collection. These included rules for military service, land ownership, and religious observance. Penalties were listed for breaking temple regulations or disrespecting the gods. Some laws described proper conduct during rituals and festivals, reflecting the importance of religious customs. Priests and scribes maintained records of legal cases and contracts on clay tablets. These documents included details about property, boundaries, dowries, and business partnerships. They were stored in temple archives for reference. When disputes arose, officials consulted these records to resolve conflicts and enforce agreements. Customs linked to the Anunnaki survived in daily life. People observed rituals for birth, marriage, and burial based on ancient tradition. Festivals marked the agricultural calendar, with offerings and processions honoring the gods. Craftsmen continued to use symbols such as the horned crown and winged disc in their work. Through these laws and customs, the legacy of the Anunnaki remained present in the structure of society. Their influence shaped the organization of government, religion, and family life long after their stories faded from living memory. In the 19th century, European explorers began systematic excavations in Mesopotamia. Archaeologists such as Austin Henry Laird and Hormuzd Rassam uncovered the ruins of Nineveh, Nimrud, and Babylon. They found thousands of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform writing. Many tablets contained myths, legal codes, and administrative records that mentioned the Anunnaki by name. These discoveries provided new information about ancient beliefs and daily life. In the 20th century, teams from Iraq, Britain, France, Germany, and the United States expanded excavations at sites like Ur, Uruk, and Nippur. They mapped city layouts, reconstructed ziggurats, and cataloged artifacts. Researchers photographed and measured statues, reliefs, and cylinder seals that depicted gods and ritual scenes. Museums in London, Paris, Berlin, and Baghdad began to display these finds to the public. Scholars translated cuneiform texts and published dictionaries of Sumerian and Akkadian languages. They compared myths from Mesopotamia with those from Egypt, Anatolia, and the Levant. Linguists traced the origins of names and titles associated with the Anunnaki. Historians studied the spread of legal codes and religious customs across the ancient Near East. Some writers outside mainstream scholarship proposed that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial visitors. They pointed to descriptions of advanced knowledge in ancient texts and the size of megalithic structures. These ideas appeared in books, documentaries, and online forums. However, no physical evidence has been found to support claims of non-human intervention. Geneticists have analyzed ancient human remains from Mesopotamian sites. Their studies show links to neighboring regions, but do not reveal markers of hybrid ancestry. Engineers and architects have tested ancient building techniques using materials and tools available at the time. Their experiments confirmed that large structures could be constructed with local resources and organized labor. Modern searches continue in museums, libraries, and archaeological sites. New discoveries add to the understanding of Mesopotamian civilization. But direct evidence for the Anunnaki remains limited to myth, art, and tradition. In the 20th century, writers and researchers outside mainstream archaeology began to propose alternative theories about the Anunnaki. Some authors, such as Zecharia Sitchin, published books claiming that the Anunnaki were not mythical gods, but visitors from another planet. Sitchin's works, starting with The 12th Planet in 1976, argued that ancient Sumerian texts describe advanced beings who arrived on Earth to mine gold and teach early humans. These theories suggest that the Anunnaki used advanced technology, including flying machines and genetic engineering. Proponents point to ancient cylinder seals and reliefs showing winged figures, unusual tools, and what they interpret as rockets or machines. They claim that the sudden appearance of writing, mathematics, and monumental architecture in Mesopotamia is evidence of outside intervention. Alternative history writers often link the Anunnaki to megalithic structures found in Mesopotamia and other parts of the world. They argue that the size and precision of ziggurats, temples, and city walls are difficult to explain with known ancient methods. Some connect the Anunnaki to legends of lost cities and unexplained artifacts, such as the Baghdad Battery or the so-called out-of-place objects found in archaeological layers. These ideas have become popular topics in documentaries, books, and online forums. Supporters collect images, translated texts, and reports of unusual finds to build their case. They sometimes compare Mesopotamian myths to stories from Egypt, India, and the Americas, suggesting a global pattern of contact with advanced beings. Mainstream scholars respond by pointing to the lack of physical evidence for extraterrestrial visitors. Archaeologists explain ancient engineering using experiments, written records, and surviving tools. Linguists analyze Sumerian and Akkadian texts as symbolic stories rather than literal accounts. Despite these debates, alternative history theories about the Anunnaki continue to attract public interest and inspire new interpretations of the ancient world. Researchers in archaeology, history, linguistics, and related fields continue to debate the origins and meaning of Anunnaki legends. Archaeologists focus on material evidence from excavations in Mesopotamia. They study city layouts, building techniques, and artifacts found in sites such as Ur, Nippur, and Babylon. Their findings show that ancient builders used local materials and organized labor to construct ziggurats, temples, and city walls. Written records detail the collection of taxes, the management of workers, and the supervision of large-scale projects. Linguists examine Sumerian and Akkadian texts to understand the development of language and storytelling. They translate myths, hymns, and legal codes, comparing them with traditions from neighboring regions. Their work shows that stories of the Anunnaki changed over time, reflecting shifts in political power, religious beliefs, and cultural context. Texts often use symbolic language to explain natural events, social order, and the origins of kingship. Historians analyze the spread of Anunnaki myths and their influence on later societies. They trace how stories and symbols moved from Sumer to Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, and beyond. They document the adaptation of Mesopotamian beliefs in Anatolia, the Levant, and Egypt. Their research is based on written sources, art, and the archaeological record. Some researchers investigate claims made by alternative history writers. They examine alleged out-of-place artifacts and reports of advanced technology in ancient times. These investigations often involve testing materials, reviewing excavation records, and consulting experts in engineering and metallurgy. Most findings support conventional explanations, but debates continue in academic journals and public forums. Museums and universities organize conferences and exhibitions to present new discoveries and interpretation. Scholars publish articles and books, sharing evidence and discussing unresolved questions. The study of the Anunnaki remains an active field, shaped by ongoing discoveries and the exchange of ideas among researchers from many disciplines. Stories about the Anunnaki have been passed down for thousands of years. In ancient Mesopotamia, priests and scribes recorded myths on clay tablets using cuneiform script. These tablets were stored in temple libraries and palace archives. Copies of the stories were made for use in religious ceremonies and education. Young scribes learned to read and write by copying myths about the Anunnaki and their deeds. Families shared these stories at home during festivals and gatherings. Parents told children about the creation of the world, the building of the first cities, and the laws given by the gods. Seasonal rituals included recitations of hymns and legends. These traditions helped preserve the stories even when cities were conquered or abandoned. As empires changed, the stories traveled with merchants, soldiers, and migrants. Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian versions of the myths appeared in new languages and scripts. In each city, local priests adapted the tales to fit their own customs and beliefs. Some stories were shortened or combined with legends from neighboring cultures. During the first millennium BCE, scribes in Assyria and Babylonia copied older texts to preserve them. The library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh collected thousands of tablets, including many about the Anunnaki. After the fall of Babylon, some stories survived in Aramaic and Greek translations. Elements of Anunnaki myths appeared in later works, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh and the writings of Berossus. In the modern era, archaeologists and linguists have translated these ancient texts. Museums display tablets and artifacts that show scenes from the myths. Writers and filmmakers continue to retell Anunnaki stories in books, documentaries, and fiction. The legends have become part of popular culture, reaching new audiences around the world. Through these actions, the stories of the Anunnaki have remained part of human history. Each generation has added its own details and interpretations, ensuring that the legends continue to be remembered and studied. Over the centuries, the Anunnaki became figures in regional folklore across the Middle East. In rural villages, people told stories about ancient giants who built the first cities and shaped the land. These tales often linked the Anunnaki to unusual rock formations, ancient ruins, and unexplained artifacts found in the countryside. Farmers sometimes claimed that mysterious mounds or standing stones marked places where the Anunnaki once walked or held gatherings. In some communities, local legends described the Anunnaki as wise teachers who brought knowledge of farming, weaving, and pottery. Folk tales explain that certain plants or irrigation techniques had been gifts from these ancient beings. Parents passed these stories to their children during winter evenings or religious festivals. The names of the Anunnaki sometimes changed, blending with local spirits, saints, or legendary kings. Travelers and merchants carried these stories along trade routes. In markets and caravanserais, storytellers recounted tales of lost cities and hidden treasures guarded by the Anunnaki or their descendants. These stories often included warnings about disturbing ancient sites or disrespecting the old gods. Some tales describe travelers who encountered strange lights or voices near ruins, attributing these experiences to the lingering presence of the Anunnaki. In later centuries, Islamic and Christian traditions in the region absorbed elements of Anunnaki folklore. Darwin and Torah. Local saints or prophets were sometimes associated with ancient wisdom or miraculous abilities, echoing earlier stories of divine visitor. In some cases, ruins of ziggurats or temples became sites of pilgrimage, with legends claiming they held secret knowledge or buried relics from the time of the Anunnaki. Modern folklorists and anthropologists have collected these stories during field work in Iraq, Iran, Syria, and southeastern Turkey. They have recorded variations in names, details, and themes, showing how the Anunnaki legends adapted to different cultures and historical periods. Through oral tradition, the Anunnaki remained present in the folklore of the region, connecting ancient myths to everyday life. In the 20th century, the rediscovery of ancient Mesopotamian texts inspired new retellings of Anunnaki legends. Scholars translated cuneiform tablets and published collections of Sumerian and Akkadian myths. These translations became available to the public through books, museums, and academic lectures. Writers and artists began to use the Anunnaki in novels, comics, and films, adapting the ancient stories for modern audiences. Science fiction authors introduced the Anunnaki as advanced beings from distant planets. In these stories, the Anunnaki arrived on Earth in spacecraft and shared technology with early humans. Some writers linked the Anunnaki to the construction of megalithic sites or the rise of lost civilization. These imaginative versions often combined archaeological discoveries with speculative theories about extraterrestrial contact. Documentaries and television programs explored the Anunnaki legends as part of alternative history. Producers interviewed researchers, showed images of ancient ruins, and discussed possible connections between myths and unexplained artifacts. These programs reached large audiences and encouraged new discussions about the origins of civilization. Artists created paintings, sculptures, and digital images inspired by Anunnaki themes. They depicted winged deities, ziggurats, and scenes from Mesopotamian mythology. Some artists displayed their work in galleries or shared it online, introducing the Anunnaki to viewers around the world. Role-playing games and video games included Anunnaki characters and settings. Game designers drew on ancient myths and modern interpretations to create adventures involving gods, heroes, and lost cities. Players encountered puzzles and challenges based on Mesopotamian legends. Teachers and museum educators used Anunnaki stories in lessons about ancient history. They presented myths and artifacts to help students understand early writing, law, and religion. Classroom activities sometimes included retelling or dramatizing the legends. Through books, media, art, and education, the Anunnaki became part of global popular culture. These imaginative retellings kept the ancient stories alive, allowing each generation to explore and reinterpret the legends in new ways. Archaeologists have searched for physical evidence of the Anunnaki for more than a century. Excavations in Mesopotamia have uncovered thousands of clay tablets, statues, tools, and building remains. These discoveries provide detailed information about ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian societies. Researchers have found ziggurats, city walls, palaces, and temples described in ancient texts. They have also identified the locations of major cities such as Ur, Uruk, Nippur, and Babylon. Despite these findings, no artifacts or structures have been discovered that directly confirm the existence of the Anunnaki as described in myth. Statues and carvings show gods with horned crowns, wings, or unusual features, but these are consistent with religious symbolism found in many ancient cultures. Cylinder seals and reliefs depict scenes of worship, offerings, and rituals, but do not provide evidence of beings with advanced technology or extraterrestrial origins. Tools and construction materials recovered from Mesopotamian sites match the capabilities of early civilization. Bricks, copper tools, and stone implements were made using local resources and known techniques. Large building projects, such as ziggurats and city walls, were constructed with organized labor, ramps, and simple machines. Written records describe how workers were recruited, supplied, and supervised by temple officials and royal administrators. Genetic studies of human remains from ancient Mesopotamia show connections to neighboring populations, but do not reveal markers of hybrid ancestry. Analysis of burial practices, grave goods, and skeletal remains supports the conclusion that these societies developed through migration, trade, and cultural exchange. No inscriptions or documents have been found that describe direct encounters with non-human visitors. References to the Anunnaki in myth and ritual are interpreted as religious beliefs rather than historical records. The evidence from archaeology, genetics, and ancient texts supports the view that the Anunnaki remain figures of legend and tradition, with no material proof of their physical presence on Earth. Mainstream scholars in archaeology, history, and linguistics approach the Anunnaki as mythological figures from ancient Mesopotamia. University researchers analyze cuneiform tablets from Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. They translate hymns, prayers, and epic stories that describe the Anunnaki as members of a divine assembly. These texts show the Anunnaki acting as judges, creators, and patrons of kings, but always within a religious context. Historians compare the Anunnaki myths to those of other ancient cultures. They note similarities with the pantheons of Egypt, Greece, and Anatolia, where multiple gods governed nature, law, and society. Scholars trace the evolution of the Anunnaki from early Sumerian texts through later Akkadian and Babylonian literature. They document how the roles and names of these gods changed over time as political and religious systems shifted. Archaeologists study the remains of temples, ziggurats, and city walls. They examine construction methods, building materials, and written records of labor and resources. Their findings show that these structures were built by organized human societies using available technology. No evidence has been found of tools, machines, or techniques beyond the capabilities of the time. Linguists focus on the language and symbolism in Anunnaki myths. They identify metaphors, poetic devices, and ritual language. They explain that references to the Anunnaki, descending from heaven or ruling the earth, are common in ancient religious texts and do not indicate literal events. Anthropologists study how belief in the Anunnaki shaped daily life, law, and government. They document the use of Anunnaki names in royal titles, legal codes, and temple rituals. They show that these practices reinforced social order and the authority of kings and priests. Mainstream scholars publish their research in academic journals, books, and museum exhibits. They present the Anunnaki as important figures in the development of Mesopotamian religion and culture, not as historical rulers or visitors from another world. Their conclusions are based on evidence from excavations, texts, and scientific analysis. Archaeologists and historians use clear methods to separate myth from evidence. Excavations at sites like Uruk, and Nippur have revealed temples, ziggurats, and city walls built by ancient people. Researchers document construction techniques, materials, and labor organization. They find mud bricks, stone tools, and copper implements matching descriptions in administrative tablets. Written records detail the collection of taxes, distribution of food, and management of workers for large projects. Cuneiform tablets include myths, hymns, and prayers to the Anunnaki. These texts describe the gods granting kingship, setting laws, and teaching skills. Scholars identify these as religious stories, not eyewitness accounts. The language often uses symbolic phrases, such as descending from heaven or shaping mankind from clay. These expressions are common in many ancient cultures and serve to explain origins and authority. No artifacts or structures have been found that require unknown technology. All recovered tools, vessels, and building materials fit the capabilities of early civilization. Engineers have reconstructed ancient building methods using ramps, levers, and human labor. Their experiments show that large monuments could be built with available resources. Genetic studies of ancient remains from Mesopotamia show patterns of migration and intermarriage with neighboring populations. There is no genetic evidence of non-human ancestry or hybrid beings. Burial sites, grave goods, and skeletal analysis support the conclusion that the population developed through natural processes. Cylinder seals and reliefs depict gods with wings, horned crowns, and unusual features. Scholars interpret these as artistic conventions to indicate divinity and power. Similar symbols appear in the art of Egypt, Anatolia, and the Levant. These images do not provide evidence of real encounters with otherworldly beings. Researchers compare Mesopotamian myths with those from other regions. They find parallels in creation stories, flood legends, and divine kingship. These similarities suggest shared human concerns and storytelling traditions, not direct evidence of historical events involving the Anunnaki. In the 20th century, the Anunnaki became prominent subjects in speculative fiction. Writers and filmmakers drew on ancient Mesopotamian myths to create new stories for modern audiences. Early science fiction magazines published tales of ancient astronauts and lost civilizations. Authors used the names and images of the Anunnaki to imagine advanced beings visiting Earth in the distant past. In 1976, Zecharia Sitchin published The 12th Planet, a book that argued the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials who influenced human history. Sitchin based his theories on his own interpretations of Sumerian texts and artifacts. He claimed the Anunnaki came from a distant planet called Nibiru and shared technology with early humans. His book sold millions of copies and inspired further works in alternative history and science fiction. Television programs and documentaries explored similar themes. Series such as Ancient Aliens, first broadcast in 2009, presented the Anunnaki as possible visitors from space. Producers interviewed authors, researchers, and enthusiasts who linked Mesopotamian myths to unexplained archaeological sites and artifacts. These programs reached wide audiences and contributed to public interest in ancient mysteries. Comics, graphic novels, and video games also adopted the Anunnaki as characters and plot devices. Game designers created worlds where the Anunnaki ruled lost cities or fought alongside humans against other powers. Artists depicted the Anunnaki with wings, elaborate headdresses, and advanced technology. These visual representations drew from both ancient art and modern imagination. Speculative fiction often combined elements from different cultures. Writers linked the Anunnaki to the pyramids of Egypt, the Nazca lines of Peru, and stone circles in Europe. They suggested that similar myths and monuments around the world pointed to a shared ancient influence. These stories blended archaeological discoveries with fictional inventions. By the early 21st century, the Anunnaki had become recurring figures in books, films, and games. Their presence in speculative fiction introduced new generations to Mesopotamian legends, even as mainstream scholars continued to study the original myths and historical context. In the early 21st century, the Anunnaki began to appear in sleep stories and bedtime history programs. Writers and producers adapted ancient Mesopotamian myths for use in calming audio and video formats. These sleep stories presented the legends of the Anunnaki in simple language, focusing on names, places, and events from Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. Production teams researched historical sources, including translations of cuneiform tablets and archaeological reports. They selected details about city life, temple rituals, and royal ceremonies to create gentle narratives. These stories often describe the building of ziggurats, the organization of early cities, and the daily routines of priests and scribes. The Anunnaki were introduced as wise teachers, lawgivers, or protectors, rather than as supernatural beings or extraterrestrial visitors. Sleep story narrators use steady, clear voices to recount the legends. They avoided dramatic music, sudden sounds, or complex plot twists. Scripts emphasized concrete actions, such as the preparation of offerings, the writing of laws, or the construction of city walls. Names of kings, gods, and cities were repeated to reinforce historical context. Some sleep stories included descriptions of ancient artifacts, such as cylinder seals, clay tablets, and temple statues. Narrators explained how these objects were made and used in daily life. They mentioned archaeological discoveries from sites like Nippur, and Babylon, connecting the legends to real places and evidence. Writers avoided speculative theories about extraterrestrial contact or advanced technology. Instead, they focused on the influence of Anunnaki myths on early laws, customs, and social organization. The stories highlighted the transmission of knowledge from generation to generation, the importance of rituals, and the structure of ancient societies. The use of Anunnaki legends in sleep stories introduced listeners to Mesopotamian history in a calm and accessible format. This approach helped preserve interest in ancient myths while supporting relaxation and learning before sleep. Interest in the Anunnaki and other ancient mysteries continues in both academic and popular circles. Museums around the world display artifacts from Mesopotamia, including clay tablets, statues, and cylinder seals. Visitors learn about the daily life, religion, and government of early cities like Ura, and Babylon. Curators explain the significance of ziggurats, temple rituals, and the development of writing. Many exhibits include translations of myths, that mention the Anunnaki, allowing people to read the stories as they were recorded thousands of years ago. Archaeologists and historians publish new research on Mesopotamian civilization each year. Teams excavate sites in Iraq and neighboring countries, uncovering new buildings, tools, and inscription. Specialists use advanced techniques such as satellite imagery and chemical analysis to map ancient cities and identify trade networks. Their findings are shared in academic journals, books, and public lectures. Documentary filmmakers produce programs about the origins of cities, the invention of writing, and the role of religion in ancient society. They interview experts, show reconstructions of temples and palaces, and demonstrate how ancient people built their monuments. These documentaries often include segments on the Anunnaki, presenting the legends alongside archaeological evidence and scholarly interpretation. Writers and artists continue to adapt Anunnaki myths for fiction, games, and visual art. They use names, symbols, and settings from Mesopotamian sources to create new stories and images. Some works follow historical details closely, while others blend myth with imagination. Online forums and social media groups discuss theories and discoveries related to the Anunnaki. Participants share photos of artifacts, links to articles, and questions about ancient history. Some groups focus on mainstream research, while others explore alternative theories. Through museums, research, media, and creative projects, the fascination with ancient mysteries endures. The legends of the Anunnaki remain a source of curiosity and inspiration, connecting people today with the distant past of Mesopotamia.